Part 2. When I finally saw Norman again, I was beginning to suspect daylight at the end of my long tunnel. It was a summer day. I was on my way back to Paris, and I was very cheerful. We were at an afternoon party. Norman was standing in the kitchen, a drink in his hand, holding forth for the benefit of a small group of people. There seemed something different about him. It was the belligerence of his stance, and the really rather pontifical tone of his voice. I had only seen him, remember, in Malaquis's living room, which Malaquis indefatigably dominates, and on various terraces and various dives in Paris. I do not mean that there was anything unfriendly about him. On the contrary, he was smiling and having a ball, and yet he was leaning against the refrigerator, rather as though he had his back to the wall, ready to take on all comers. Norman has a trick, at least with me, of watching, somewhat ironically, as you stand on the edge of the crowd around him, waiting for his attention. I suppose this ought to be exasperating, but in fact I find it rather endearing, because it is so transparent, and because he gets such a bang out of being the center of attention. So do I, of course, at least some of the time. We talked, bantered a little tensely, made the usual doomed effort to bring each other up to date on what we had been doing. I did not want to talk about my novel, which was only just beginning to seem to take shape, and therefore did not dare ask him if he were working on a novel. He seemed very pleased to see me, and I was pleased to see him, but I also had the feeling that he had made up his mind about me adversely in some way. It was as though he were saying, "Okay, so now I know who you are, baby." I was taking a boat in a few days, and I asked him to call me. "Oh no," he said, grinning, and thrusting that forefinger at me. "You call me." "That's fair enough," I said, and I left the party and went on back to Paris. While I was out of the country, Norman published advertisements for myself, which presently crossed the ocean to the apartment of James Jones. Bill Steeron was also in Paris at that time, and one evening the three of us sat in Jim's living room, reading aloud in a kind of drunken, masochistic fascination, Norman's judgment of our personalities and our work. Actually, it came off best, I suppose. There was less about me, and it was less venomous. But the condescension infuriated me. Also, to tell the truth, my feelings were hurt. I felt that if that was the way Norman felt about me, he should have told me so. He had said that I was incapable of saying "F you" to the reader. My first temptation was to send him a cablegram which would disabuse him of that notion, at least insofar as one reader was concerned. But then I thought, no, I would be cool about it, and fail to react as he so clearly wanted me to. Also, I must say, his judgment of myself seemed so wide of the mark and so childish that it was hard to stay angry. I wondered what in the world was going on in his mind. Did he really suppose that he had now become the builder and destroyer of reputations, and of my reputation? We met in the actor's studio one afternoon, after a performance of The Deer Park, which I deliberately arrived too late to see, since I really did not know how I was going to react to Norman, and didn't want to betray myself by clobbering his play. When the discussion ended, I stood, again on the edge of the crowd around him, waiting. Over someone's shoulder, our eyes met, and Norman smiled. "We've got something to talk about," I told him. "I figure that," he said, smiling. We went to a bar and sat opposite each other. I was relieved to discover that I was not angry, not even, as far as I could tell, at the bottom of my heart. But, "Why did you write those things about me?" "Well, I'll tell you about that," he said. "Norman has several accents, and I think this was his Texas one. I sort of figured you had it coming to you." "Why?" "Well, I think there's some truth in it." "Well, if you felt that way, why didn't you ever say so to me?" "Well, I figured if this was going to break over a friendship, something else would come along to break it up just as fast." I couldn't disagree with that. "You're the only one I kind of regret hitting so hard," he said with a grin. "I think I probably wouldn't say it quite that way now." With this, I had to be content. We sat for perhaps an hour, talking of other things, and again I was struck by his stance, leaning on the table, shoulders hunched, seeming, really, to roll like a boxer's, and his hands moving as though he were dealing with a sparring partner. And we were talking of physical courage and the necessity of never letting another guy get the better of you. I laughed. Norman, I can't go through the world the way you do because I haven't got your shoulders. He grinned, as though I were his pupil. But you're a pretty tough little mother too, he said, and referred to one of my grimmer of my village misadventures. A misadventure which certainly proved that I had a dangerously sharp tongue, but which didn't really prove anything about my courage, which, anyway, I had long ago given up trying to prove. I did not see Norman again until Provincetown, just after a celebrated brush with the police there, which resulted, according to Norman, in making the climate of Provincetown as mellow as jello. The climate didn't seem very different to me. Dull natives, dull tourists, malevolent policemen. I certainly, in any case, would never have dreamed of testing Norman's sanguine conclusion. But we had a great time, lying around the beach and driving about, and we began to be closer than we had been for a long time. It was during this Provincetown visit that I realized, for the first time, during a long exchange Norman and I had in a kitchen at someone else's party, that Norman was really fascinated by the nature of political power. But, though he said so, I did not really believe that he was fascinated by it as a possibility for himself. He was then doing the great piece on the Democratic Convention which was published in Esquire, and I put his fascination down to that. I tend not to worry about writers as long as they are working, which is not as romantic as it may sound, and he seemed quite happy with his wife, his family, himself. I declined, naturally, to rise at dawn, as he apparently often did, to go running or swimming or boxing, but Norman seemed to get a great charge out of these admirable pursuits, and didn't put me down too hard for my comparative decadence. He and Adele and the two children took me to the plane one afternoon, the tiny plane which shuttles from Provincetown to Boston. It was a great day, clear and sunny, and that was the way I felt, for it seemed to me that we had all, at last, re-established our old connection. And then I heard that Norman was running for mayor, which I dismissed as a joke, and refused to believe until it became hideously clear that it was not a joke at all. I was furious. I thought, you son of a bitch, you're copping out. You're one of the very few writers around who might really become a great writer, who might help to excavate the buried consciousness of this country, and you want to settle for being the lousy mayor of New York. It's not your job. And I don't at all mean to suggest that writers are not responsible to, and for, in any case always for, the social order. I don't, for that matter, even mean to suggest that Norman would have made a particularly bad mayor, though I confess that I simply cannot see him in this role. And there is probably some truth in the suggestion, put forward by Norman and others, that the shock value of having such a man in such an office, or merely running for such an office, would have had a salutary effect on the life of the city, particularly, I must say, as relates to our young people, who are certainly in despair need of adults who love them and take them seriously, and whom they can respect. Serious citizens may not respect Norman, but young people do, and do not respect the serious citizens, and their instincts are quite sound. But I do not feel that a writer's responsibility can be discharged in this way. I do not think, if one is a writer, that one escapes it by trying to become something else. One does not become something else. One becomes nothing. And what is crucial here is that the writer, however unwillingly, always, somewhere knows this. There is no structure he can build strong enough to keep out this self-knowledge. What has happened, however, time and time again, is that the fantasy structure the writer builds in order to escape his central responsibility operates not as a fortress but as prison, and he perishes within it. Or the structure he has built becomes so stifling, so lonely, so false, and acquires such a violent and dangerous life of its own, that he can break out of it only by bringing the entire structure down. With a great crash, inevitably, and on his own head, and on the heads of those closest to him. It is like smashing the windows 1 second before one asphyxiates. It is like burning down the house in order, at last, to be free of it. And this, I think, really, to touch upon it lightly, is the key to the events at that monstrous, baffling, and so publicized party. Nearly everyone in the world, or nearly everyone at least in this extraordinary city, was there. Policemen, mafia types, the people whom we quaintly refer to as beatniks, writers, actors, editors, politicians, and gossip columnists. It must be admitted that it was a considerable achievement to have brought so many unlikely types together under one roof, and in spite of everything, I can't help wishing that I had been there to witness the mutual bewilderment. But the point is that no politician would have dreamed of giving such a party in order to launch his mayoralty campaign. Such an imaginative route is not usually an attribute of politicians. In addition, the price one pays for pursuing any profession or calling is an intimate knowledge of its ugly side. It is scarcely worth observing that political activity is often, to put it mildly, pungent, and I think that Norman, perhaps for the first time, really doubted his ability to deal with such a world, and blindly struck his way out of it. We do not, in this country now, have much taste for, or any real sense of, the extreme human beings can reach. Time will improve us in this regard, but in the meantime the general fear we experience is one of the reasons that the American writer has so peculiarly difficult and dangerous a time. One can never really see into the heart, the mind, the soul of another. Norman is my very good friend, but perhaps I do not really understand him at all, and perhaps everything I have tried to suggest in the foregoing is false. I do not think so, but it may be. One thing, however, I am certain is not false, and that is simply the fact of his being a writer, and the incalculable potential he has as a writer contains. His work, after all, is all that will be left when the newspapers are yellowed, all the gossip columnists silenced, and all the cocktail parties over, and when Norman and you and I are dead. I know that this point of view is not terribly fashionable these days, but I think we do have a responsibility, not only to ourselves and to our own time, but to those who are coming after us. I refuse to believe that no one is coming after us, and I suppose that this responsibility can only be discharged by dealing as truthfully as we know how with our present fortunes, these present days. So that my concern with Norman finally has to do with how deeply he has understood these last sad and stormy events. If he has understood, then he's richer and we're richer too. If he has not understood them, we're all much poorer. For though it clearly needs to be brought into focus, he has a real vision of ourselves as we are, and it cannot be too often repeated in this country now, that where there is no vision, no people perish.